I'm not worried about that, but how's, are we broadcasting anything up there? Good to go? Okay. What's up, guys? How's everybody doing? Good? Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it. How many's here for the first time? Awesome. Thanks for joining us. How do you guys hear about us? Heard? Talked about that earlier. How about you? Social media. Where? Facebook. Facebook? Very cool. Okay, awesome. Anybody else? Facebook? Okay, cool. So was it, do you remember where on Facebook?
I feel like I just looked at my name in real estate or
cool.
something like that.
You found Hopportunity, something like that?
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, guys, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. So I wasn't here last month, and it was like a crossing of ships, right? So if you guys haven't heard, Alex stepped down and JP stepped up, right? So congratulations, JP. Right? This is something that we've been doing for 5 years, right? And we were just talking about that, like, man, at that time they go by like super fast, right? So obviously going through COVID, keeping it live, and going live here. If you guys see all the microphones right now, these guys have stuff. It's everything that's online, okay? So Ashley and Vanessa help us in the background. Okay? They help us. Otherwise, we're going to probably, the way we're starting this off a little bit different because it's, like I said, it's weird. I'm used to Alex doing this thing, starting his music, and so we'll figure out it's just a different start. It's really interesting. Like you get stuck on a rhythm. So, how many people, let's just see, how many people have done deals in this room with real estate? Awesome. So there's a lot of people doing real estate in this business, okay? What was the purpose of starting this group is to get together, have beers, talk real estate, learn something, and bring local professionals in, right? That was the entire premise of this group. Me and Alex were tired of going to events and then telling you like 30 minutes through the event or towards the end of the event, just run to the back of the room and pay like $300, $500, $1,000 to learn some shit. It just got so annoying. So we're like, why don't we start something ourselves? So then we started to get together, we had some beers, and then this is how this thing took off, right? So if you guys online and you guys here, you will never find somebody that will come here and sell anything, right? And fortunately enough, these guys are coming from Norfolk and talking on behalf of Norfolk to the short-term rental space, right? If you guys have been around long enough, you've seen we had Gary Copenhaver come in and talk. We had Matt from Tazarat come in and talk to the investor side. So we thought it'd be really cool to hear from the city side, right? What they see and why and things that they're going through, okay? And they're on the clock. Unfortunately, they can't have any beers. And I was trying to push it. Like, cover it up. You can have a beer, right? That's the other part about this is we like for these guys to have fun. We've had attorneys in here. We've had multiple different types of investors in here. This is meant to be fun and just hanging out. You don't get this time back, right? And that's one thing I feel like is really important. It's like you're going to be here for a little bit. Enjoy yourself. Right? So you got kids here. You got families here, right? You got the dogs here. Yep. Oh, okay. Now you can hear me. We got the dogs here. Where is he at? There he is. So I love the fact this is just keeping it almost like a little close knit type family. And if you guys stay in this business long enough, you're going to realize this is a really small pond, right? Everybody knows everybody that's really doing business, right? And it only takes one time to screw up, and you're done, right? So that's why I say always. Don't forget who you are and where you are, and do good business, okay? Because it will follow you in the long run. I spend more time on our company to make sure we do the right thing than not, right? And even if it goes and takes a little money out of our pocket, we're going to do the right thing. Right? It's actually one of our core values, right? So let's do a little introduction. JP is going to take over from here. Guys, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to letting these guys talk about what they have, and let's get on it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So originally, social media, all the marketing that's been going out for this one. We originally had Ann Tucker, who was, she kind of, from my understanding, kind of heads the team. She's part of the planning and zoning department for the city of Norfolk, program manager for the short-term rentals, and kind of manages their whole registry. She unfortunately couldn't make it out. So instead, she sent her team. So we got two for the price of one. Yeah. Which works out. And these guys are the boots on the grounds, going through everything. We got Russell Manning. Russell handles the majority of the conditional use permits, right? We're going to hear that term probably a lot as CUPs, right? For short-term rentals. He'll speak to everyone and answer questions concerning potential short-term rentals, like what to look out for potential short-term rentals. He'll speak on the registration process, in which you'll see in some of the handouts. Hopefully, if you didn't get one, we'll come back around with some handouts on there. We got Tom McLean. He's an inspector for short-term rentals, right? And we all want a good inspector on our side, right? Inspectors are key. So he manages inspections for zoning permits as well, and he also looks out and enforces any illegal operating short-term rentals. So as Sean has mentioned, this topic they've had in the past, short-term rentals overall has come up pretty much every year since the group's been meeting, and it's great to see all the different aspects of the short-term rentals. Tesseract has spoken in the past, as Sean has mentioned, so they're giving you the investor side of things. We've had other folks speak about like setting up a short-term rental as far as the property itself, like building it out, how to set it up, software, how to manage it. Now we're getting kind of the back end of the idiosyncrasies of how to work with the city doing so. Because obviously, if we don't get anything pushed through with the city, we won't have a business operating as a short-term rental. So it's great to have these guys to come out and devote their time and take some time out of their day. It's great they're getting paid because they deserve it. But yeah, so we can just grateful round of applause for these guys. Again, the handouts, they're going to include a flow chart for the short-term rental registration process.
Does everybody have some paperwork? Good? Okay.
Good. Yeah. Reviewing potential short-term rental properties, eligibility, looking for basic requirements, and being aware of common issues that arise when potential short-term rental properties come along, and the registration guidelines. So we're just handing it over. Tom and Russell.
All right.
Thanks again, guys.
Thank you. All right. Well, I guess I'll start here, and then we'll finish up with Tom. We'll try and keep this interesting as we can. So I'm sure. So everybody's familiar with short-term rentals, Airbnbs, Verbos, all of that. Norfolk's rules tend to be more complex than other cities. They're depending on who you ask, they'll tell you there's a reason. They might say different reasons, but the ultimate goal of all of the rules that we have is to allow short-term rentals in a way that's not detrimental to the neighborhood. So especially around in Ocean View, we've got lots of short-term rentals, but there's still people that live there. That's their full-time place of abode. They don't want to live in a place that's got a whole street full of places that are contrary to their enjoyment. So we've it's a complex set of rules, but they're there for a purpose. So anything, Norfolk has its own definition for short-term rental, which is basically anything under 30 days. Anything more than 30 days is considered long-term, and we don't care. You can do whatever you want, rent it out for 6 weeks, to whoever you want to rent it out to. If it's more than 30 days, we don't need you to come through us for anything. There are a few things you need to be considered legal as a short-term rental. That's typically going to be your finalized zoning permit and your business license. Some of the properties require the conditional use permits. The zoning permit is easy comparatively. It's an online registration. It's quick. It might take you a few minutes to fill out. Usually that's going to be if you have an administrative permitted property, you can probably be done in 2 to 4 weeks, and you'll be approved, legal, good to go. If it requires a conditional use permit, which we'll talk more about, it's more extensive. That requirement, that's going to go through, you're going to have to meet with the Civic League, you're going to have to go through the Planning Commission, you're going to have to go to City Council. It's going to be a more intensive look at the property. There might be some additional requirements that pop up in that process. So it's typically going to be more expensive, but the approval range for that is 2 to 4 months, depending on City Council and some other factors. If you do get all of the registrations last 2 years, And then they can be renewed as long as everything's still good. The conditional use permits, your first one is 2 years. And after that, we renew them at typically a longer duration. Right now, I think it's 5 years for the renewals. So there's two different types of short-term rentals that you should be aware of if you're looking at Norfolk. We look at homestays and vacation rentals. So homestay is what it sounds like. You live in the house. This is your house. It's on your driver's license. That's going to be the not as complex option. That one's allowed in most zoning districts. And there's a pretty easy dividing line. If there's 3 or fewer bedrooms, then you can do your registration. If it's 4 or more, it's a conditional use permit. They do require that the operator keep that as their primary residence. And you also don't have to be on site as long as you're renting the whole house out. If you're going to rent out a portion of it, they do require you to live there. And then it can only be on single family properties. You can't have a duplex and call it a homestay because you can't live in both units at the same time. So vacation rentals are more what people think of when they think of getting a property as an investment. It's not your single, it's not your house. It's not on your driver's license. You live somewhere else. Any property with more than 4 bedrooms is going to require a conditional use permit. Anything with more than 3 or more units is going to require a conditional use permit. So if you have a 4-plex or a larger house, those are all going to need conditional use permits, no matter where you're at. Some zoning districts are different and require conditional use permits for all of them. As far as the requirements go for operating them, they're pretty standard. There is one of those sheets there, has a website at norfolk.gov / some numbers and then / short-term rentals. That website has most of this information on it. So if you want to look up some more specifics on the requirements, they are all listed there. But we've got the standard ones, cameras on the outside, decibel meters on the inside, remote entry. We've got, you have to have a response person. This is usually the hardest requirement for people, especially if they're not familiar with Norfolk. You have to have a response person that's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that can respond to the property within 20 minutes. So if you don't live in Ocean View, it typically means that you'll have a property manager that does or has an employee that does, so that they can meet that 20-minute response time. It is something that we discuss if you're going through the conditional use permit or the registration. It's something that Tom here can check. If there's an issue, and you might get a warning if he calls you, but if you're not there in 20 minutes, it's probably not going to be a warning. So some other things, we got max occupancy. You can't, have a 2-bedroom house and rent it to 10 people. It's limited to 2 people per bedroom. There are parking requirements. They vary by the district. Towards Ocean View is less parking. Typically, you're not going to have more than like 2 parking spaces for a big house. Anything 3 or fewer bedrooms, I want to say, is 1 parking space. If you're in some of the more suburban kind of looking neighborhoods in Norfolk, it's going to be a parking space per bedroom. So those are kind of your range. With the conditional use permit, as I was talking about, there's some additional requirements. The zoning ordinance in Norfolk has specific requirements for landscaping. So like foundation screening is what they call it, where they plant the shrubs in front of the foundation that's visible from the street. There's a minimum tree canopy ordinance. 20% of the lot has to be covered by a tree canopy based on the tree when it gets big. We don't need you to plant a 50-year-old tree. So those are some requirements, so if you buy a property and it's completely, there's just no trees or anything, that's one of the things you can expect, that we're going to have you plant a tree or 2 in the yard. Private trash pickup is something that the city has required. So you can't use the city cans. If I think the requirement has you picking up within 24 hours of your last guest checkout, and trash can't stay there. If you've got a guest that's there for a week and they produce a ton of trash and it's overflowing, it can't sit there for more than 36 hours. You gotta have it picked up. We also might look at things like driveway repairs or sidewalk repairs. So if you buy a property and it's, even if it's the city sidewalks all busted up, that could potentially be a condition that's put into that conditional use permit, that you have to repair that sidewalk. Flood regulations, that's another one that gets people. If you're in the high risk flood zones, we look at bringing it more into compliance. So if you buy an old house and it's got an HVAC unit that's sitting on the ground, but the flood zone has it up here, that's going to be an expense. That expense can vary. I've heard operators, talk about $5,000 if you're just moving it from here to here. I've had operators, that have it, it's underneath of a porch, so they can't raise it. They got to move it, and they're looking at $20,000 or more to move the HVAC. Sometimes there's other requirements, typically nothing more major than that. Sometimes we might, put you're supposed to have a notification sign on the inside and outside of the property with that contact information for your 20-minute response person. We might have you put that sign in a specific spot or something like that. But those other ones are usually the big ones. Now, the common kind of challenges that we see people run into, not enough parking is a big one. They buy a house, it needs to have 2 parking spaces and they only have 1, but there's nowhere to put another parking space. That could potentially mean that no matter what you do else, otherwise, you're not going to be able to get it approved. Another thing is buying something where somebody before you has put an unpermitted driveway. Or if you decide to put an unpermitted driveway, oh, it doesn't have parking, well, I'm going to go ahead and do this, nobody notices. We're going to notice. We've got aerial photos, street photos. It's pretty hard these days to do things under the radar. So that's something that can get people. I would highly recommend, if you're looking at buying a house, it's got a beautiful new driveway, you might ask if they have a permit for it. We've seen some, and there's certain requirements in some of the districts, if you're in certain, we call it the coastal resilience overlay, and that driveway might need to be something pervious so water can go through it and it doesn't produce runoff problems. And they've put a unpermitted, big, beautiful, non-pervious driveway in, you might have to remove it. And that's an additional expense, so. That goes for any other things that should have permits, sheds, fences, pools, decks. If it should have a permit and it doesn't have a permit and we figure that out, then it could be an additional expense to figure out. So if you're looking at buying a house and you see something that's new, it's always good to ask if they had the permits. HVAC is something that they'll frequently put in. Somebody flips the house, they put a new HVAC in, they put up a new fence, and then you get it and you realize that you have to take it all out because it's all in the wrong spot. Shared space is another trouble spot. So around here, if you're in a suburban neighborhood, you don't have a lot of shared space. You pull right off the street into your driveway. Places like Ocean View have neighborhoods where in order to get to your house, you're driving down a driveway that you share with 10, 15 other houses. If that's a shared driveway, that's not a public road, we have to have consent from everybody else that uses that driveway. So, we've had people, they get a property, they don't realize that in order to short-term rental that property, they have to have the approval of 20 of their neighbors. And it definitely can throw you for a loop, especially if you've got, one neighbor that's just dead set against having short-term rentals. Another thing that some people have heard of, but most have not, are the air installation compatibility use zones, or ACUs as we call them. They've got them around Oceana, but they've also got them around Norfolk Naval Station. You'll typically see clear zones and accident potential zones, or APZs. Those ones you can do if you find a house that can be registered. You can do a registration in the APZ, but you cannot do a conditional use permit. You can still apply, but they're not going to, approve it. It's in the zoning ordinance. The city council's position is to not poke at the Navy, and the Navy doesn't like it. So we're going to, disapprove those. The noise zones that are part of that is another thing. If you're coming through and you need a conditional use permit and you're in a noise zone that's a 65, they call it DNL or higher, you have to have an engineer certify that you meet building code for sound attenuation. So if you're looking for an easy property, avoiding those APZs, avoiding those noise zones are definitely things to keep an eye out for. Multifamily ones are another one. You might buy a fourplex. It looks like a great place. It's right by the beach, and it'd be a great place to short-term rent. Well, unfortunately, if you're going to do short-term rental in it, the building code considers it a transient use, which means you have to have a different certificate of occupancy, which typically means you're going to have to add sprinklers to a building that wasn't built for sprinklers. And I've seen, once again, a wide range of prices on that can range from $7,000 to $15,000 per unit in order to get your certificate of occupancy. And then finally, the NRHA, the Norfolk Redevelopment and Housing Authority. They've built a number of neighborhoods in Ocean View area and some other parts of the city. And anytime they build a single family home, they put a deed restriction in there that says that you can't do commercial activities, and that includes short-term rentals. Not every real estate agent that sells a house that has a deed restriction can find that. I guess it doesn't always pop up on the title unless everybody has caught it going forward, but it's still a valid restriction. It doesn't, from our point of view in zoning, it doesn't necessarily stop you, but NRHA's lawyers have a different opinion, and they will pursue legal cases against people that are violating the use restrictions. So for more information, like I said, the website there, the short-term rental website for the city, is a great place to start for the basic information. There's another website the city uses. We call it Norfolk Air. It's air.norfolk.gov. If you're buying a property for any purpose in the city of Norfolk, that website is a must-have kind of first place to go. It's got every bit of information the city has on a property in one easy-to-see spot. You plug the address in. It's going to tell you, the number of bedrooms that the city counts it as. Because if you buy one and it's listed for 3 bedrooms, so you think it's going to be easy, and then you get it and the city has it a 4-bedroom because they've got some bedroom they've turned into something else, then you'd need a conditional use permit, or you have to go to the assessor's office and get them to fix it. But the same website's going to be able to tell you what zoning district you're in. It's going to be able to tell you what character district you're in, which is what the parking numbers are based off of. It's going to be able to tell you if you're in the APZ or any of those noise zones, your flood zones. All of that information is on that website. The zoning ordinance, if you're ever up for some light reading, is also a good place. It does have all the rules in it. It's better than some jurisdictions, but it's still a zoning ordinance. It's not exactly an exciting read. And then you can always contact us. We would much rather you send us 50 emails until you find this property that fits whatever criteria you're looking for, then you buy it, and then you be mad at us because you missed something, and you have to spend $100,000 on this property to be a short-term rental, and you were thinking you could just register it and be done in 2 weeks. So we can't guarantee we're going to catch everything, but we'll definitely give it a good shot. You can email us. str@norfolk.gov is also in your handouts. That's the best spot. That kind of comes to the group, and we'll take a look at it and see what we think. Some neighborhoods, is another one I would probably add to the challenges. Short-term rentals are apparently great investments. I know that because I see lots and lots of people contacting me on a daily basis asking to do them. But they can be contentious in the neighborhoods. Like I said, there are people that live in these neighborhoods, and not all of them are fond of short-term rentals. Sometimes they have valid concerns. Sometimes the concerns are a little more intangible, but there's still concerns that people still live there, and they're still city residents, constituents of city council. So we have to take that into consideration when we're doing these. When you're doing the conditional use permit, remember one of the steps is the civic league. So if you move into an area that is all owner occupied and they've been there for 40 years and you want to put a short-term rental in the middle of it, you can expect that they are not going to be thrilled with that decision. The civic league is not getting, resistance from them or your neighbors is not 100% guarantee that you're not going to get approved, but it definitely is a factor. The planning commission, when your application comes through and it comes to me for your conditional use permit, I'm looking at it to make sure you check all the boxes, right? So as long as you meet all the zoning ordinance requirements, me and our department, typically we're going to recommend it be approved. If you go to, once you go to planning commission though, they're going to look at our recommendation, but then they're going to listen to everybody that wants to speak. If anybody wants to speak in support or opposition of it, they're going to listen to them, and they can make decisions that are a little more on the subjective side than the objective side that we typically look at. With that, I'm going to send it to Tom over here. Tom is our dedicated short-term rental inspector. He visits all of them, every single one of them, and spends a lot of time driving around.
Yes, thank you. So officially, I'm with the business. Norfolk started last summer a business compliance unit, and we have 5 of us inspectors in the city. The rest of them handle bars, clubs, 7-Elevens. I'm the only one that does short-term rentals. It's a job on its own. It's a beast. And I assume everybody's came here because they want to do the legal side. They don't want to be illegal and not, because that's what I go for. I work with the illegal and the legal. The illegal, if we find you listing illegally without the permits, you'll get a letter, say fix it within 30 days, which is typically stop listing, become permitted. It's a scary letter because I have people calling me. It's official and it's certified. If you don't call me on that letter, then you get a warrant. We do civil fines up to $5,000 and fines for illegal ones. That people will call me when they get that warrant from the deputy, guaranteed. I always get those. And if you, 9 times out of 10, I didn't know the rules. We understand. There's a lot. Virginia Beach does it differently than Norfolk, Chesapeake, and Portsmouth. I don't know what they do. So we understand. That's why come to us, ask us, hey, we can help you guys out. And in terms of the legal ones, we have a zoning permit. You get one if you become registered. There's requirements, like you said, the cameras, the signage that says who you are. You see them probably around here. Ours aren't as fancy as Virginia Beach's. Ours just had a little placard. And we check there's a decimal meter needs to be in the house. And we also, honestly, I love inspecting short-term rentals because you guys make them so clean. And all my other guys are doing dirty construction sites. And I'm going to this nice, air freshened place. And so I love that part of it. And you guys do a good job of keeping the house. That's one of the requirements, keeping it upkept, keeping the trash away, keeping the trees or the bushes all cleared up. So that's not that bad. And now, once you become registered, like he mentioned, there are neighbors who do not like short-term rentals. Understandable. Every case I handle personally. I'm the only one to handle them, so of course I'm handling them personally. I investigate everything. If we got a loud party noise, if we got parking on the grass, we've got trespassing, whatever, we handle it case by case. 9 times out of 10, after the investigation's over, you can't control humans. You can't control the renters. Right? We understand that. You're not going to be able to tell somebody at 2 in the morning, you're not going to be, hey, get out of the car or get off of your property. Understandable. But as long as, if you are operating these short-term rentals, if you are making the best due diligence to do whatever you can to stop whatever the problem is, we're fine with that. I'm not going to come down. We had one recently. They said they had a loud party on a Sunday or a Saturday night. 2, 3 in the morning, the operator was still trying to kick them out. I saw the evidence. I saw they were trying to do that. That's fine. They didn't leave until the next morning, but there was evidence that they were trying to do the right thing. And 2 in the morning, I'm not awake. I'm not coming out. So if I see the evidence that you at least attempted to do the right thing, that's fine. And I'm the one dealing with the neighbors, not you guys. So I'm the one telling them, they tried everything. They did everything they could, the best we can. That's basically the biggest thing, is that he mentioned the neighbors, and we keep saying the neighbors because we have a handful of them who just will latch on to everything. And as long as you are following the rules, or hello, I don't know, where you coming? No, hey, you want to be an investor? We got people that sign you up. It's like future investors right there, guys. Come on, you gotta get on them. Like I said, if you are doing everything you possibly humanly can, we're not going to ding you. We're not going to come after you. We know that my job, my boss on day one told me we're trying to get everybody registered. So we're all having, from the city point, we want your taxes. From the the local point, we have a registration of who is operating. So again, it's I say it's not hard, but it's also not simple. I have in Ocean View, we have about 3 or 4 big operators. Tesseract is one of them, and that has changed the attitude, I think, of the short-term rental game. Is less and less of the mom and pop running the short-term rentals, and more of big operators running it because they can handle the 20-minute call time, which we do check. And it's a 20-minute call time. If this is an example of what not to do. Had to invest real estate people. They took over a house. We called the number. They said text the number, not texting. I hate to say it, but most of the complaints aren't going to be from the younger people. They're going to be from the older people in the neighborhood who aren't going to text you. And so little things like that, And then most of the time, it's a correction. We just help you. It's a warning. Hey, fix it this time. I went out to that property recently. They fixed it. No big deal. And that's what we want to see. We want to see improvement. And like you mentioned, for the CUPs, they start with a 2-year registration. You got good 2-year registration, they'll recommend 5 and longer, and that's good. So as long as you're operating good, they'll see that and they can get you longer, so you don't have to keep coming back through the process, which is a pain for everybody. I don't have much on the enforcement side. That's basically all I've got. If you have any questions, we're happy to take a few. Yeah, we can switch into that now.
Let's make sure the microphone gets around so you guys can. Any questions you guys have?
What, loud enough? Perfect.
Hi guys.
You want me to turn it on?
Hi.
I've emailed with Russell. I'm not gonna name my name.
Oh, we'll find you. I got your car already. I got your tag.
So question from attending city council meetings and planning commission meetings, what is the lowdown on the density?
So it's a constant concern from the neighbors specifically. It's a concern amongst planning commissioners and city council. Is this question of density? It's something that we're trying to measure in an effective way. It's a question that seems real easy to ask. It's really hard to answer. The data just doesn't exist. And everybody has a little bit different idea of what the data should be. So if you ask the density, is it, the top number in the equation is easy, the number of short-term rentals. What's the bottom number? Is it the density of short-term rentals amongst single-family homes? Is it the density amongst all units that exist? Those numbers are not as easy to come by as you would think. It's something that we're working on. Right now, there's, until we can get solid information on the number, we can't put a percentage, a limit on the density. It's ultimately a question that does not get answered by our department. It's a question that would be answered by planning commission and city council. With any of these things, that are ordinance related, they have to ask for us to do it, and then they pass it, and it goes through city council and gets approved as part of the ordinance, and then we can monitor that density. We can recommend things be approved or denied based on density. But at this moment in the game, it's not something that we really have an effective way to measure to the point that we can say, oh, we don't think your short-term rental should be it because there's too many of them.
So it's TBD.
Yes. Yeah. Go for it.
For the short-term rentals properties, say for instance, if I have a 3-unit, but I live in one and I want to rent out the other 2. One, do you have to be licensed to do it? 2, what is the occupancy again for that? If I wanted to rent out the short-term rentals for
So
the other 2?
great question. If you live in one unit and you rent out the other 2 in a triplex, our ordinance requires that your permit be good for the whole property. So you would have to have a conditional use permit because you have the 3 units. That ordinance would have to cover all 3 units because it's a vacation rental. So even though you live there now, you could sell it and somebody else could go. The conditional use permit goes with the property, not with the person. So and that goes with any conditional use permit. If you open a gas station, you obviously want to be able to sell your gas station and then have it still be a gas station. You don't want to buy a property that can't be used for what it's currently being used for. So it's the same kind of thing with the short-term rentals. The conditional use permit's good for the property. You would need the conditional use permit. You would need your registration and your business license in order to do that. Now with the 3 units, you would also need that new certificate of occupancy. So even though you're living in one, you'd still have to sprinkler all 3 of them in order to get that certificate of occupancy.
Okay.
Yep.
And my second question,
Mhm.
for shed, because I live in Newport News, so I'm knowing the laws through that one,
Mhm.
that one for the shed. So what are y'all shed requirements here for Norfolk? What's the maximum?
So I'm not the shed person, so I don't know all of them offhand. But
Like, what's the size? Like, what's the max size
So
you can have for a shed?
the max I want to say is pretty standard across the state because it's a building code thing. So once you hit a certain square footage, you have to have permits, building permits and stuff for it. Regardless of the size of the shed, you still have to have a zoning certificate at minimum that says that, basically it's just you're taking a survey, you're drawing where the shed's going to go with dimensions, and the city's saying, yeah, that looks like it fits with the ordinance. Just to make sure, you don't want to put your shed 3 inches from your neighbor's garage, because if it catches fire, so is your neighbor's garage. So there's setbacks and everything that are part of every lot in the city. 3 feet I think is usually pretty common. So everything that's in there has to be 3 feet from the edges, in a regular lot.
Okay.
So
Thank you. And there's a fee for it too, you said?
what's that?
To apply for a shed permit or something like that?
Yeah, it's called a zoning certificate you'd get for the shed, and it's just you can apply for that online. That's one of the quick ones. Shed permits, fence permits, driveway permits are all pretty quick to get. They're very low cost if there's any cost, and there's pretty tight turnaround.
The reason for the shed is like what money things you buy from like Home Depot, Lowe's.
Yeah, like if you already have one in your yard and you just want to upgrade.
Yeah.
That's where I thought she was going. All right, so if you buy one of these little sheds on Home
Yeah.
Depot or Lowe's, you convert it, water and electric, then you turn it into a campground. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, no, just having it in your backyard, just in general for storage.
Yeah,
For storage.
yeah, if you're just using it. Yeah. So if you're
Like lawnmowers. No, just like upgrading.
Yeah, so if you're storing stuff in it, then you would just, if you're buying it from like Home Depot, Lowe's, or something like that, most of those are going to be below that size that you need a building permit for anyway. So you would just need the zoning certificate that shows that it meets the setbacks and they can deliver it. Putting.
We went through something like this.
Yeah. So if you're gonna live in it, that's a whole another thing outside of my scope. Yeah. It's not the first time I've been asked the question for sure. Yeah, and Norfolk does have an allowance for they call them accessory dwelling units, ADUs. They do have an allowance for that. There's I can't remember the exact square footage. There's a maximum square footage that those can be, and there's a hard number that's a max square foot, and then it's also below a certain percentage of the main house. So like if you buy a tiny little 800 square foot house, you're not going to put a 500 square foot tiny house behind it. It's too big compared to the main house. But there's building code considerations and all that stuff. But Norfolk does allow ADUs in most of their residential districts. You just have to go through that permitting process and get all that taken care of. Now, an ADU is just that. It's an accessory dwelling unit. It's not its own dwelling unit. So just because you have a single family house, you put an ADU does not make it a duplex. So you can't rent out, like if you own the property, you can't rent out the ADU. So you might think you got lucky, you bought a house that's got an ADU in the back, but only the property owner can rent out. Now the property owner doesn't have to live in the main house. You can live in the ADU and you can rent out your house, but you can't, what's that? It would still be a homestay because there's only, we only count it as one property. There's only one mailbox for them to go to. There's only one address. You're not having an A and a B. When you start getting A and B, that's when you start getting a multi-unit building. So.
So this.
Hello? Everybody online. It's like
So, are we talking about, like, as an example, like the she shed? What if you're not going to rent it out and you're just going to allow maybe somebody to stay there? Does it have to have sprinklers and meet the
So if
setback and all
you're
that
just
stuff?
if you're just putting a thing, a shed back there that has a use that's if it's going to be a dwelling unit, it would be an accessory dwelling unit. It would have to have all the permitted electrical and a kitchen, at least a kitchenette or bathroom, those kind of things. If it's just you want a room that you turn into a man cave, you put TV up with some sound in it. She shed, you want to go out there, you want to do what you want to do. But you start getting a gray, you start getting into gray areas when you start staying in it.
As long, honestly,
Right. Correct.
well, is it
Correct.
Is it your family friend? Is it you're just having cousins over? You're having.
Right.
30 days or more is our cutoff. So if you have anything 31, don't care. 29.
Yeah, it might,
care.
it might conflict. You might get some
30.
conflicts with other parts of city code and building code and stuff. If you got someone staying in a space that's not made for someone to stay in, there's rules for bedrooms. They got to have, you got to have a door, you got to have, a smoke detector, you got to have a window to get out of if the door's on fire. So like if it's just a shed, you probably don't meet most of those. So I probably would avoid. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So for a short-term rental to become, if you need the registration of the zoning permit, you have to be rented for 30 or less days. So if it's up to 29, 30 is the cutoff. So
yeah, and if you're putting it in for over that, there's probably some other building code kind of permits to go. There is an email. Norfolk tries to keep everything pretty easy, so there's a zoning DSC at norfolk.com, norfolk.gov. That website, any kind of question like that, hey, I want to put this shed in that occasionally my cousin's going to stay in. They'd be able to help you out as far as what the requirements for that would be. Yeah. So. I think he's got a question right there.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
It's going to the YouTube, I guess.
All right. So I got 3 questions.
Sure.
So when it comes to obviously every city, mean, I'd assume that they kind of operate like independently.
Yes.
Is there like other like any cities in the country that you guys kind of are watching as like the guinea pigs of like short-term rentals? Or
For
are you just
us,
figuring it out on
that
your own?
typically is us.
Honestly, we are the guinea
We-
pigs. We are the ones
we're,
that we are the only ones
yeah.
with dedicated planners and inspectors toward short-term rentals.
Yeah.
And we're also the only one that we know that are going for penalties for civil fines and violations. Virginia Beach doesn't do that, so we know that. So we're the guinea pig.
So you're saying you're speaking for like the city of Norfolk, not
Mhm.
like all of Hampton
It's
Roads.
just City of Norfolk.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, that's the disclaimer, just City of Norfolk.
Yeah.
We don't talk for everybody else.
So like, what are, I guess, for other cities to kind of take suit of like what y'all are doing? Are they going to want to see like how much
So,
taxes are produced?
I
like,
think
for what y'all
they're
are doing?
moving in that direction. Some of them, I'm sure at a high level are looking at the number of taxes that are produced, but I think most of the drive to put the regulations in place is specifically to kind of mitigate the any sort of negative effects on the neighborhood. They are higher traffic, than a single family house. You're gonna have more turnover. If you live on a narrow street, you're used to the narrow street. You're used to tight parking. You're used to any of those kind of conditions. If you're turning your house into a short-term rental and you've got a new person there, every other day, those people aren't used to that tight street. They're not used to the parking. That you're more likely to get in a situation where you got someone parked block someone else's driveway or parked in the grass or doing whatever the case may be. So that's most of the other jurisdictions, at least that I've looked at, that's kind of where they're going to. But they're mostly looking at us. Where Norfolk has probably the most extensive registration and enforcement component of any of the other cities.
Okay, cool. And then appreciate it. And my second question is like, when it comes to law, or I don't know what you guys would call them, but like rules specifically where like the HVAC has to be this high up the ground for like flood zones.
Mhm.
Is that for the next 20, 30 years, or like do those laws like change every like so often that could cause like investors to invest in it?
Any law can change. Typically they, fast paced for the city is probably going to be in a duration of months to years. Most laws they're going to, they passed this change. I want to say almost about a year ago is when the most recent short-term rental ordinance was passed. And they might look at some modifications. Typically, though, they're not going to look at wholesale rewrites or big giant changes, too frequently. Consistency is one of the parts that of any sort of regulation that allows business. You can't run a business if it's not consistent. If the rules are going to change. That said, you do have to be in compliant with the rules at the time that your permit is granted. So, you get your conditional use permit or your registration and that expires, you have to be in compliant with whatever rules are there. There are some people that we've worked with recently that ran into that situation with the last rewrite where they were able to have a registration, an administrative registration before, and now they need a conditional use permit. And they were coming to renew, looking for this easy, quick online process, and end up with this 4-month multiple public hearing kind of process that was a lot more extensive than they were expecting. So it's always a risk.
We don't grant.
So the grandfathering, it's not considered grandfathering because you have a permit with a specific duration. So if you were operating, a short-term rental 10 years ago, well before any of the rules, and you could prove that you might be able to be grandfathered into something. But if you were not operating it until the rules were there, and then you have a permit that expires, your permit expires, there's no grandfathering or continuation of any sort of those rights. That's correct.
Yes. We have there's only about 6, I think, short-term rentals in Norfolk that when the program started, they didn't put expiration dates on them. And so there's like 6 or 7 out there that they technically would be grandfathered,
Yeah.
but we just don't have it. We monitor them, but everything else got to stay up to date.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most of, I think, all are Ocean View. All of them are, yeah.
So yeah, and then So like with what you were saying, I kind of, I guess, came up with another question.
Mhm.
But like when you were mentioning, I don't know how much a sprinkler system would cost, but like let's say $15,000,
Okay.
and like let's say an investor didn't have like equity in the home, or they didn't have the funds to, like facilitate something like that.
Mhm.
Would you guys work out something with them? I know it's not the city's problem.
So
you just have
that's
to
a
stop.
building code, because it's a building code problem. It's not that it doesn't have the flexibility that other issues might have. So for the same reason, if you need to have windows, they're not going to let you build a house without windows because you can't afford windows. It's a building code problem. So it's the same thing with the sprinklers. So you could certainly continue whatever use is there. So if you bought a triplex or fourplex and it's long-term rentals, or you wanted to rent one or two of them out kind of midterm, more than 30 days, you don't need the permits. You don't need to get the sprinklers at that point. You could certainly do that until the point in time when you could afford or finance it or whatever the case may be. And then there's another kind of component to that I don't think I mentioned too. So like typically that conditional use permit is 2 years. The renewals are typically 5 years. They can go up to 10 years. And we do look at the 10-year time frame for those instances when you're spending a bunch of money. So if you buy, a big apartment complex, and you're spending, $15,000, $20,000 per unit, and you've got 10 units, now you're up to $250,000, in renovations, we're going to look at that and say that we're going to offer the 10-year permit to kind of make up for that extra investment, because there's there's a lot of
You're safe for 10 years.
there's a lot of components. Yeah, there's a lot of there's all right. One more thing I'll add on that, then I think you might have another question. So the other thing, people with the sprinklers, you might look at it and say, okay, it's going to cost $15,000 a unit for sprinklers. There's more to sprinklers than that. You can't just run a water hose from the outside spigot and call it a sprinkler. So like you have to connect to a city water line, an additional connection that's not the house service. So you're running an additional line from the street. To get that. That's an additional expense that's not always factored in. Other things related to that. If your property's on Ocean View Avenue and you cut out into that, you can't just cut a little 12-inch wide trough, put your pipe in, and then fill it with asphalt. They will make you, there's concrete underneath that asphalt. They'll make you tear up the entire concrete pad that you broke into and replace it and then asphalt over that section. So there's other things like that kind of drive that cost beyond what, if you go and ask a sprinkler company how much it's going to cost to put sprinklers in, their number might not involve that, especially if you get really unlucky and you end up on a street that has a water line that can't support your sprinklers. And then you have to run your own water line all the way down the block to the water line that can. So you're looking at, you bought this building and you realize you're going to have $250,000 of investment to put sprinklers in. And then you realize, well, it's going to cost another $100,000 just to get the water there to hook up to the sprinklers you put in. So.
Cool. And then, so my last question is, so like when y'all were having that conversation about density, is there like cities that are like going, I guess there's like a bunch of questions with that, but like what effect does that have like on investors in like the city of like, if there's a certain density that's reached?
So it's really a hard question to answer because there's so many unknown variables. There's variables we don't even know are variables. So it's a question that really can't be answered. But like with the neighborhoods, they're looking at, they don't want a whole street full of short-term rentals. At what point does it turn from a residential neighborhood to a decentralized hotel complex? That's what they're looking at. From the investor standpoint, as far as any sort of future regulations, it's really an unknown. There's a variety of different ways different cities do it, both inside and outside of Virginia. Some have caps on the number. You might have a city that says you can only have 5 short-term rentals in 500 feet. Or you might have, you can only have 2 short-term rentals per block face, which, would just be from street to street, down a street. You might have, different there's different measures, of how they would measure density. Anything that would cap the density at a lower density than any particular area would obviously be problematic. If we're going to say you can't have more than 2 short-term rentals on a block face and there's 4 of them, then we're going to have to figure it out, something out, because somebody's not going to be happy when they come to renew and they can't. So there's a lot of unknowns. I don't think there's any real way to get a definite answer right now.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
What was some of the stuff you had online?
Okay, so there are a few. Does welding slag count as previous material for parking spot / driveway? I know it's been accepted in other cities / counties in Southeast PA.
No, the city of Norfolk does not recognize what they call non-bonded surfaces as driveway. So a bonded surface would be obviously concrete. This material here could be bonded. There's different engineered solutions that have, some sort of hybrid paver gravel system. There's anything that holds that gravel is considered bonded. Anything that's just gravel or loose material, we've seen crushed shells, anything like that is not a bonded surface and does not count as parking. So.
And actually, I guess it's just a lot of comments and one other question.
Sure.
Oh, God.
So,
Big comments.
any ideas on what the engineering evaluation for sound attenuation runs? Ballpark figure?
That is such a broad question. It's you'll never get an answer, even from the engineers that do it. So it's really difficult to go back and re-engineer a building to be more sound resistant than it currently is. What it's been explained to me, I'm not an engineer by any stretch of the imagination. But how it's been explained to me is that sound is a vibration in the air. So anything that makes your house more airtight is by definition going to make it more resistant to the sound, because the sound can't get in vibration. Typically, if you buy an old house, let's say you bought a house that was built in the 70s and it's never been upgraded, in order to bring that to be more sound resistant, it would need things like new windows. A lot of the windows in the 70s were just that single pane. Vibrates when trucks go by. That's going to vibrate when planes fly by, and that sound's going to come in. So windows, you might be looking at additional insulation in the house. Some of especially in the 70s, they built a lot that just had almost non-existent insulation in them. So you might have to gut walls and re-insulate it. A lot of them did not insulate the ceiling. You'd have to open that up and insulate it. If it's on a crawl space, same thing. You've got a vented crawl space, but the sound's going to go right through it. So you're going to have insulation up on the bottom. Depending on the house, it could be a significant investment to bring it up to what would be considered meeting the sound attenuation code that we have today. So.
Yeah,
Seems like you got a connection over
he's
here.
not happy.
We get that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't help with that, but I asked the question. So,
We get
figure it out.
we get hate and love from both sides depending on the day.
Well, that's what this is for, right? Like, this is for people that are online can't hear. This is for both sides of it. We as investors always talk about like us and our requirements, what we need to do, versus what the city needs to do and their requirements, right? I think it's a pretty valid thought, too. I hate to say it, but it's like it sounds like it's turning answer, right?
Yeah, there is a lot of uncertainty. Yeah. Yeah. So we spent a whole day last week in a seminar given by an attorney. So there was a lot of it depends.
A lot of it depends. 9 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but
This is good. It's helpful.
yeah,
Hopefully online is helpful.
yeah. Thank you. If you have more questions, like I said, str@norfolk.gov is the best place. My card is or was on the table. If you need more, I think I've got some more. But my name, Russell, 2 S's, 2 L's, .manning@norfolk.gov.
Easy.
Yeah. So,
Difficult one.
Yeah.
The hard one. Guys,
All right.
let's hang out for a little bit. We got done a little bit earlier. Timeline wise, we got to be pretty much done like 9:30. Get out of here. One, actually, gonna start kicking y'all out. Two, they're gonna start shut down at 9:45, I think. So is it 9:45? So hang out for a little bit. Let's network, talk, meet some people. That's what this is all part too. Come and ask these guys some questions. But online, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. And obviously, we're going to try to share this paperwork with you guys. It's already shared. Okay. Rocket. Good to go. So that's Ashley's like, shut up, I got it. Vanessa got it done. And then again, do we know what we have? I know we have a schedule. What do we have up for the following month?
I don't know, Vanessa, too.
So we'll obviously broadcast that and put it up so you guys can join us for whatever that is. We get our schedule advanced because it's so much organizing. And like even today, she had to fall out. Like things change in everybody's life, right? So sometimes we might have things happen and then we might have to replace them, but we always figure something out. Unless it's like the last minute. I think we had a hard money lender just completely drop off on us and they just weren't able to join. So we weren't able to do it, right? And I think
It will be either hard money or multifamily.
okay, so either hard money or multifamily, right? Either way,
I like this.
We've been doing a pretty good amount of hard money lending, so I can talk to that. But
Send that to me.
love to bring some people
Please.
in we have that done business with.
I love this.
Lending in the market. And if you guys don't know, we're talking about hard money. Like the credit line is going to be tightened up real quick at the end of Q3 and Q4. So all these, what's that? All these guys that are lending right now and borrowing money, the cost of money is going to change quickly, right? It's going to change drastically. So we, as a company, have already allocated for that. We are on a liquid fund account. We are not on a credit line account, right? So it's a little bit different on how we're operating. But there's other lenders out there doing the same things. So either it's going to be that or multifamily. We're going to bring those guys in to talk about. But guys, thank you so much for
You're welcome.
coming to talk to us. Appreciate it and for sharing the time. Yeah,
Yes.
definitely. Any questions before we shut it down and just do some networking? Because we're going to turn the cameras off, mics off. I cannot seem to get the buttons in.
Yeah.
You guys online. You should have been here.
Should have been here.
All right, so thanks online, guys. We're going off of here. And guys, hang out, have a beer, and let's network. Cool? All right, thank you.
so you got like a Connex box night.